Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today at Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave, this is Olive, and we try to have a little fun while we talk about books and sometimes some other things to help spread the joy of reading. So hopefully my voice holds up today. It's getting a little bit better, I think. Where it's finally got some snow here and it's pretty cold, so I'm wearing my big puffy sweater today, try to keep warm. Try to put a sweater on Olive, she didn't want it. So today we're going to do we're midway through the month, so we want to do sort of our mid-month wrap up. Couple things that were on our TBR for this month, and a couple things that were a surprise that weren't on the TBR for this month. So we just want to show you guys what we've read so far. So the first thing is this was on our TBR. This is a science fiction classic, I guess you would say, Rebirth by John Wyndham. Now, this is better known famously as The Chrysalids. It was a UK book, published as The Chrysalids in the UK. When they published it in America, they retitled it Rebirth. I don't know why. Must have thought it was a more enticing title. And so it's probably more a word that more commonly reflects the theme behind the story. So this I read with, or group read with Scott and Becky at the Bookish Bryants, Brandy at the Book Eclectic, and Brian MR. And so we all enjoyed this book. With this story is set in the way future. After there has been, we see a sort of an isolated society that is set in what's obviously northeastern Canada, kind of away from at the tip of North America there. And so, which seems to have somewhat escaped a lot of the drastic effects of an apocalypse. And we are living in an apocalyptic world at this time. And this society believes that this society has somewhat regressed. They believe that what the world went through, what is pretty clearly a nuclear holocaust, they believe that happened. They refer to it as the tribulation. It was basically God's wrath, punishing the old, what they call, I think the old people, they refer to them as, the old technological society of the pre-tribulation days. And so this society has regressed under the basically oppressive hand of religious fanaticism. And it is very, very strict religious society, and our main character our main character's father is kind of like in charge of this particular area, and that particular area seems to be even more extreme than the general religious based government. And so it's, John Wyndham in this story, he does a really, really great job of sort of setting up this, creating this religiously fanatical society, so that as you're reading it, you actually get riled up as you're reading through it. And it explores a lot of prejudice, because in this post-apocalyptic world, a lot of animals, plant life, and people are born with mutations. And whether large or small, there's no tolerance for those mutations in this religious society. And so they take different, very extreme measures to deal with it. And so there are other areas called the Fringes and the Badlands, which are sort of mysterious areas that are not so close to where these people are located in northeastern Canada. And so we follow the main character as this boy David, and so he's growing up in this very harsh environment, and he and some of his friends have a sort of development of their own, and I don't really want to say too much more about it, because I don't want to spoil the book. But basically, it's the book through David's eyes. The book explores this sort of what can happen to a little isolated society after an apocalyptic event like this, and really gets into the nature of like I said, a fanatically religious society, and the prejudice that can occur under the influence of that sort of type of society. And follows it's very fast paced based on the things that happen to David and the people around David in this story. So it's very interesting. The ending could have been a little bit, but I think everybody in the group read liked it, but I don't think anybody gave it a 5 star. So it was definitely worth reading. The ending was could have been better, and it was a change of narrative style right towards the end, and so. But it was a good science fiction story, and you know, if you can, you got to kind of go into a little bit with an open mind of in terms of speculating in the far future. Okay, that's enough about that one. So the next one we read is Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar. So this one's a little bit older than the Rebirth and the Chrysalids was published, what, 1955. So this was originally published in 1916, and like a lot of these older stories, fantasy stories of the time, this was originally published in multiple parts and in pulp magazines. A lot of these were. So this was first published in a magazine called All Story Weekly, in a couple of issues in 1916, and then I think it was 1918 it was turned into its own book. But this Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar is, yeah, see, my voice did not hold up as well as I was hoping it would. Sorry. So this is book 5 in the Tarzan series. I've been buddy reading these with Dia over at Novel Idea, and we've been having a great time with them. So in book 2, The Return of Tarzan, a big part of that story was Tarzan discovered and had some adventures in this lost city of Opar. And there was a great story, lost city with temples and other type of people there, and religious rites and things, and treasure and all that kind of stuff. So it was cool. That was book 2. So in this book, for certain reasons, Tarzan returns there. And so that has a little bit of a bearing on the story, but actually most of this story does not take place in Opar. And so with this brought out some new things. What Edgar Rice Burroughs does with these Tarzan books is, I think with each book there's some familiarity, but with each book he brings something new to it. And he did that with this. What I think in a couple ways. One was we were introduced to a new villain. And this villain was a little bit different than any other villains we'd seen before. This villain was somebody that wasn't always a villain, but based on some things that happened mentally, he became a villain. But this was the most Machiavellian villain. Oh, that's a tongue twister. Machiavellian villain that we have seen in the Tarzan books. This villain was a master at manipulating, and he was just so good with his words and his ability to craft stories and deceive everyone around him. Very, very cool villain, I thought. Another, new thing that this Tarzan book brought to the series was this sort of introduced more of these sort of, I was calling them armies as we were reading through it, but really just these like different big groups of people and groups of warriors, so that you ended up with all these big different, battle groups, I'll call them. I don't want to call them armies because they weren't that big, but these like battle groups that were traveling around in the jungle and interacting with each other, so that you had some big major battles. So if you like to see that, you like to see that sort of more warfare on a larger scale in your fantasy books, this one definitely brought that to the Tarzan series. And this is another one, you should read them in order, especially since this one, was somewhat based on the city that showed up in book 2. But I think this is another one where you actually could just read this by itself. I would recommend you start with book 1 if you're interested in Tarzan, but you could pretty much read this on its own. So this was really good. We really enjoyed this, just like all the Tarzan books so far. That was probably one of my more favorite Tarzan books. Okay, next thing we read is, this was not on our original TBR for this month, but we got a surprise in the mail. Our friend Dia over at Novel Idea, who I just mentioned, very kindly sent us this graphic novel, The Nice House on the Lake. Try to do it so you can see it there. And this is, I had heard of this actually, but didn't know that much about it. But she had seen it, and Dia thought it was something that Olive and I would like, so she sent it to us very, very kindly. And we looked at it, and so this is, written by James Tinian, and I guess the author is Alvaro Martinez Bueno. And so this is, I believe there are only two volumes. So this is a collection. This is a trade paperback of the first six issues. There's a second volume of issues 7 through 12, and then I think that's it. I think it's pretty relatively short, self-contained story, which those are kind of nice sometimes when it doesn't go on and on and on forever. You get some closure after a reasonable number of issues. And so we read this shortly after we received it, and we really loved this. We already bought the second volume because we're going to read that right away because we really had a good time with this. And basically, I can't tell you too much about it without giving it away, but basically, there's this guy, Walter, and he has picked out a number of different friends. He introduces you to these different characters, all different walks of life, a painter, a writer, a doctor, consultant, these different comedian, all different people. And these are friends from different points in his young life. So some of them he refers to as from the high school group, some from the college group, and some from the New York group, which was the social group that he hung out with after college. So these people are all, I think the oldest they are is like mid-30s. They're all around the same age. And so these are all people that he's met at these different friendship stages of his life that were important to him. And so he invites them on this getaway vacation to this nice house on the lake. And it is a very nice house on a very nice lake, this very posh place. And Walter has filled it with everything that they could want for. It's like a vacation paradise. And while they were there, they discover that some things have been happening to the rest of the world around this nice house on the lake, and Walter is not quite who they thought Walter was. And so that's the most I can say about it, but hopefully that's enough to whet your appetite. And this was really, really good because you have all these friends from different time periods that are stuck in the house together. Some overlap, some of them know each other well, some of them don't. But all of a sudden they discover these very big things about Walter and the world, and they're all in this house together. And they have to somewhat figure out what's going on, somewhat to figure out how to get along with each other and get to know each other. So this was really, really good. And so based on Volume 1, we'll be giving the review on Volume 2 very soon, but based on our Volume 1 so far, we would recommend picking this up. This, I think, came out in 2021. I think it ran from sometime in 2021 to 2022. Yeah, I think that's right. So, okay, and then the last thing that we read so far this month was another surprise, and this is The Lost Continent by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And this one we did not plan on reading, but we read this because this was very kindly sent to us by Jim over at Mystery and Mayhem. He had been talking about a lot of these old Edgar Rice Burroughs and showing off all his vintage copies, so we got in a short conversation about it, and he very kindly sent this to me because he knows this is one that I wanted to read. So this is similar to the other Tarzan book. This was first written also in 1916. This one was published, the whole story actually was published in a single 1916 issue of, what was that one called? All Around magazine. And so the whole story was in that one issue. And then it's very interesting history. Then people back then that were fans of Burroughs couldn't get their hands on this because then that was it. For decades, it was just in that issue of the magazine and no reprinting of it for decades. And then finally, I think it might have been the 50s where it was finally printed in book form. And this publication is 1960. This copy is 1973, but it was first 1963. So when they were publishing the story then in book form, they retitled it The Lost Continent. But this one is really, sorry, my voice isn't holding up as well as I thought it would. So this one is, this is set in basically a sci-fi, I guess. And this was set in the far, far future. Check out that cover. Isn't that an awesome cover? I'll try to hold it so you guys can see it. And so this is basically set. So this was being written in the throes of World War One, and whether there was a question about whether aversion to the U.S. getting involved in the war over in Europe, and so this was written kind of with that backdrop, and basically this was sort of an alternate history story, really, where the U.S. does not get involved in that war. The U.S. basically isolates itself and shuts itself off. And this book, when this story was first published in All Around magazine, it had a different title. It was you're not gonna be able to see it, but it even says here on original title Beyond 30, and it was called Beyond 30, which I think was a better title, more appropriate title for this. It was called Beyond 30 because when the U.S. isolated itself from Europe, they basically set this boundary of the longitudinal, what do they call that? The 30th meridian, right? Meridian, that longitudinal line, the 30th and the 175th, so that they basically couldn't go to that side of the world, and so that was kind of the rule. They would they'd have these ships that would patrol the 30th, but you could never go past that. And it follows our main character, who's a young captain of one of the ships, and it accidentally goes across. What was it? There was some storms, I guess, and accidentally gets pushed over the 30th. And so I don't want to give too much away, but he and some individuals end up over in Europe. They end up over in Europe, and I don't want to say too much. And so it follows basically their discovering what actually happened over there when America shut itself off and formed what was it, the Pan American Alliance with that whole side of the world, and just never got involved in that Great War. And so this is set a couple hundred years later, and now this captain is exploring and trying and finding out what happened to England, what happened to the rest of Europe, and what happened beyond that, and what was the effect beyond that. So it was a neat story. Again, not a 5-star read, but it was a fun read. Another one that's definitely worth reading. And I really can't say any more. It's a short book, so I really can't say any more than that about it. But I don't know that I've ever heard anybody talking about this book. So if you've read this one, let us know, because we'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So that was what we read so far in the first half of January here. We read Rebirth, otherwise known as The Chrysalids, by John Wyndham, Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar by Edgar Rice Burroughs, The Nice House on the Lake by James Tynion, and The Lost Continent by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So, as always, let us know if you've read any of these and you have any thoughts on them. We're always curious to hear what other people thought of these. If you don't have anything substantive to leave, you can always leave Olive a puppy emoji down in the comments. She always likes to see those. So, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you very soon. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.